Okay, 3, 2, 1. Welcome everyone, my name is Thomas Maurer and I'm a GBB for Sovereign Cloud at Microsoft. And I'm happy to be joined today by Dino Bordonaro to talk about Azure Local, digital sovereignty, and especially Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Local and how it fits into the picture. Thank you for being here, Dino. So for the people who don't know can you explain a little bit who you are, what you're doing, and what your experience is? Because I know you did a lot in the Azure hybrid and multi-cloud and also in the Azure cloud space especially. So, yeah.
Yeah, my name is Dino. I'm basically from Germany. I'm a 6-time awarded Microsoft MVP for Microsoft Azure, like you was before as well, before you joined Microsoft. And since 2 years also for the cloud and data center management part, which is Windows Server as well as the System Center suite. So in that work, I've always been in data centers since I think 2007. I've experience of like 25 years in IT, mostly IT operations in data centers, 24/7 in production. And like 8.5 years ago, I came across an idea from Microsoft, which was bringing the cloud to the customer after everything was into the cloud. We found out we don't put anything in the cloud, not because we can't, but because of data connections, of the latency, whatever. And then there was this new product or this new toy around called Azure Stack these days, which now then became Azure Stack Hub in the future. Then there was Azure Stack Edge. Now these days we have Azure Local as a new version out of this, as well as Azure Arc. So I'm there since I think 8.5 years in that space, like you. I know I read a post from you where you deployed one of the first Azure Stacks from HP, like a long time ago in 2017, I guess, some around this. So yeah, my experience is mostly about the Azure stuff, architecture, operating consultancy. I run my own company, Bordonaro IT, and we are advisors for hybrid cloud mostly, or adaptive cloud, what is the real name. And basically we're hybrid experts, and my job and with my team is to run clouds for people. Like you buy an Azure Local, we provide it as a managed service. And in this case here, I'm joined from my best friends here in Romania, which is Binbox. And they run it even better than me because I'm only an architect these days and a dad of 2 kids with 7 years. So the Binbox guys support us in Romania. They have 3 awesome data centers over there to make sure we can provide basically complete Microsoft Azure Local services sovereign in Romania. And this is what we talk about today, like Azure Local, the Azure World, Sovereign Cloud, and Azure Local on top to make sure the data stays where the customer wants to have the data.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. No, again, it has been a pleasure to work with you over the last few years, I would say. I almost want to say decades, but that we're not that far yet. But yeah, you brought it up absolutely, and I think this is also, as you know, my current day job is talking with customers. How can they do sovereignty in the public cloud, but also in hybrid or on-premise environments? And then there's a lot of questions. Okay, how do we do this, and so on? And there's obviously, as you mentioned, you just basically gave me a perfect slot here to say, hey, there are like workloads which not necessarily are designed to be in the cloud, right? It's like there is obviously a lot of like good stuff, and you get a lot of benefits from running in the cloud. You can do that also in a sovereign way, but there's still reasons why you cannot necessarily run everything in the public cloud.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I quickly show this slide here, and obviously there's just summarize a little bit on what are these workloads, what are the reasons in that topic, and we will dive in, especially on the sovereign topic, a little bit more. But are these kind of like also the reasons you're seeing? What are your main reasons for customers to stay in a hybrid or on-prem environment together with the public cloud?
I mean, these days, beside, you know how it is, right? The political situation is unpredictable worldwide, and customers are just afraid to get locked out in many ways. So we need to talk about basically where is the data stored. And for me, it's very important to say there's not this answer that says black or white. This would be too easy, right? If you could just say we take whatever, Linux, take Mint Linux, looks like Windows, and replace Windows system with this. It's not this, because we have a legacy world of applications which are not that easy to convert from, let's say, a Windows 2012 R2 to, I don't know, Windows Server 2025. So the customers have legacy stuff they have to work with. They have all these cyber risk stuff going on with the encryption stuff, whatever. And we have these days clearly IoT, like automation, which means you have two worlds mostly at the customer side. And you have a perfect slide for this here. You have OT, which is the IT systems that stay in the production, which is normally a closed system for many customers. Like in the manufacturing space, I have a couple of the car manufacturers that work worldwide. So these systems don't have internet access, and they don't want to have internet access. This is like a complete closed loop called OT, the Internet of Things. And then we have the IT guys. And the IT guys, as well as the OT guys, in the past, they had not that many like automation tools, but beside automation tools, it's like how you run the cloud, because that's what this all is about, what we're talking right now, because we operate a cloud these days. This means if I have the silo, I have my firewall admins, I have my storage admins, my Windows Server admins. It doesn't work like this anymore, because when we deploy stuff, it's all in one file. It's, like an ARM template, biceps, Terraform, you name it. But the whole security, the infrastructure, the resource, everything is inside that one package, which only works if we know the use case. What are we deploying? How is it exposed to the internal network? Is there internet connectivity needed? And all this. And the biggest blogger for me is they talk about technology, but this is not a technology game that we play here. First of all, it's a play of use cases and which data do I have, and my internal security compliance governance around these data. So if there's a protection plan for, let's say, the new Mercedes E-Class, they don't want to put this in the cloud firsthand, and then secondhand they run 3D applications like SolidWorks, Inventor, CATIA, you name it, where they do 3D calculations about crash tests, stuff like this, which has a lot of GPU power which is needed. And this is also one of the benefits of Azure Virtual Desktop, to say we have the possibility to use GPUs from NVIDIA's Blackwell series, like the new 5 or 6000 series, that you can have for the calculation running these LLM models on-prem, and at the same time to train your own models, but as well as you have NVIDIA GPUs or AMD ones to accelerate these 3D modeling programs on the hardware. So your engineering is never giving out any data to an external data center, no matter where it is. It's just the use case. The engineers need a 3D software with the graphic cards and the accelerated desktop client for this, and they need it in the OT network, isolated from network. That's the thing that we should talk about. We shouldn't talk about 4 GB of RAM or 8 or 12 or 4 cores or 10 cores. It's all about what does this guy need to do his job. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think you hit some very interesting points there. Yeah, and I mean it's similar as we said, right? There's many reasons why you want to have a like hybrid environment where, again, you take advantage of the cloud, but you have certain cases and scenarios where you need to run on premises or at edge locations. And that's what we do a lot with what we call the Azure Adaptive Cloud approach, where we said, okay, hey, it doesn't really matter. Location is not necessarily the important part about the cloud, right? It's not just where it is, but it's like, okay, how do I actually do the operations, as you mentioned it in our discussion earlier? How do I do that? And so I see a lot of different reasons. These can be like what I call, like, there's the technical reasons, right? When you do, especially also when you now work, you mentioned IoT systems, or like right now we talk with a lot of customers about local AI, where it's like, okay, hey, we have these latency. We need to be really like quick on processing these things. You can also see here on the slide, we also in manufacturing, we see these near real-time systems where we actually need to process this, right? Where it's just about this. But then it's also about like these resiliency things, right? There can be, like we have this here, like you mentioned, this mission critical business continuity. And this is not necessarily like the one example I usually give. I worked with a company who was running factories all over the place. And these factories, they were sometimes out in nowhere, and they don't have a really stable internet connectivity, and they don't want to shut down the whole factory just because internet is gone. So they need to have some local processing in these factories, which then they use also to forward data to the cloud and process it even further, but that they have these systems there so they can continue run, and they're not depending on internet connectivity in this case. And again, there's many scenarios like this. If you think about point of sale systems, for example, in retail stores, right? Like imagine if something is not available anymore, like you don't have internet and you cannot process like just new orders, and it's lunchtime, for example, in a food store. That's horrible, right? So you need to design the solutions for these different things. And then, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, it's also the digital sovereignty and regulations part, right? And I think that is something we hear much more about these days, where there's different reasons and things we look at. It can be like data residency laws, which we have, but then there's, as you can see here on the slide, much more to this. And I know you're also working with customers to address these scenarios. And I think one point to really highlight here, this doesn't mean like in every case you need to be like fully on premises, right? I think that is something where I have a lot of conversations with customers to say, well, actually, there are some really good solutions in Azure which actually help you to address these, right? Not everything maybe, but a lot of these things we can address as well. So what is your view on this?
The view is exactly what you just explained. I mean, you have a big part of the business which is also from critical infrastructure providers. So, for example, if there's an energy plant in Romania and they would run a cluster like a 2-node Azure local system, if they would go down from the internet and were air-gapped, I mean, who should control the power plant? But I can tell you a worst situation that I was also shocked a bit about, like a couple of years ago when I first met it. There are companies out there, it's not always about losing money. Sometimes it's about losing really people's life in the worst case, because I have a chemical company and they have an OT network also on a big plant, which is in the middle of nowhere, like you just said. And the longest chemical process, which is super dangerous for them, runs 3 days. Now imagine if the IT would, for the OT system, the connectivity to the IT systems for these machines like IoT, there's Siemens behind it many times, who does the controllers and all that. So imagine the connection gets lost and you have the chemical state uncontrolled of all these machines. In worst case, they can explode. So what they want is, they look into their factory and the products they produce, and they say the longest running process is like, let's say 50 hours. And then they ask me for like 3 days of continuous manufacturing possibilities to make sure if we have an outage from the internet because something attacked the headquarters, the office network, and SAP is down, nothing works, they want to make sure they hit the red button and can make sure that at least everything goes in a controlled way down to zero and no life is in danger and none of the factory machines is damaged. So this was a thing that I was not aware of. In my mind, it's just like they produce a car, everything stands still, you go home. No, it's not about this. It's critical infrastructure as well. And we had with Azure Stack Hub before, now with Azure Local, the same situation. We can put them either in a data center like the ones from Binbox, which I just mentioned, but also from the customer. So we have a grace period in these systems. So even if there would be like 4 weeks no internet, that's not something that goes down. You would lose maybe the control plane if you're in an online mode with Azure Local, but with the Azure Local disconnected operations, you would even then stay online, and we run critical infrastructure worldwide. And that's the point. And the projects probably nobody talks about. Also, we both are in projects like this that, you know, it's critical infrastructure, it's highest NDA level, but this proves always something which is bulletproof, that you have cloud in your hands. And now the best point is the devs develop it in Azure. They test it in the pipelines in Azure. And if there's AKS in the version 1.52 and the test was green, I have the same image of this AKS image 1.2 going down to my Azure Local. And if it worked here, it works here because it's the same hardware image that we tested in Azure that we can deploy. It's a freedom for the devs, because they can say the factory is on 1.4, so they deploy a dev cluster. They write an upgrade script to the newest version. They make it work in Azure. And I would say in 99.98% of the cases, if it run in Azure and the test was green, it will run in Azure Local as well. And this is a lot of help and maintenance time and also risk security that we give them in their hand, because the critical infrastructure, we have a maintenance window is maybe like 60 days in advance, or sometimes half a year, that you need to declare it. If you have from an IT perspective, an emergency change because something broke, this is nothing you and I want to file. This is paperwork for weeks explaining why the energy plant was not controllable for amount of time of 4 hours, for example. So we from Microsoft side, I say we from the MVP work with the PG, but also from Binbox in that case, we make sure that we do whatever we can to test and make it as smooth as possible for the customer to run the cloud workloads on-prem. Microsoft does the same in the cloud, and then the customer just uses this cloud in a software version, and it's consistent in the public cloud. And then we take the same service and make it on a long table called Microsoft Arc, like I always say. You bring it with Azure Arc onto the system, and you use it there with the same version. This is a lot of saved work for the devs. It gives you much faster development cycles, and the debugging also works in many times much better. I don't know what your experience is, but I hear a lot of devs who are skeptical and say, I don't know, maybe. And then you make it clear, it's Kubernetes, plain vanilla. It's just the Azure driver in it. We automate the basement for disks, CPUs, memory stuff, key vaults, and all that. But it's Kubernetes. If it runs with you here, it probably will run on AWS. It will run on bare metal. It runs everywhere. But we even can make sure that the hard drive, which has these additional add-ons like the secret stores, the persistent disks, the identity providers, we have all this, which is proven and tested and running in production millions of times worldwide. We take the same hard drive and put it to Azure Local and run it there as well. And that's the beauty of it, that it's not similar, it's the same hard drive. Mm-hmm. And that's what I always hear, which makes it super from a risk perspective, risk controller, governance, security. These guys are happy because they say it's fine, because if we don't touch it, we can just take the description, the docs from Microsoft, and we save so many work in the background.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So I think this is very much like something I see a lot is, right, this like consistency between the public cloud and like having this on-premises environment and actually getting the benefits from cloud, right? So when I speak now with customers and say, okay, we have these on-prem workloads and we have the cloud and so on. I mean, like a lot of customers are really seeing the benefit of this in what you just described, right? Which would I call the innovation part, because cloud drives a lot of innovation and you get a lot of benefits. Like you get all these higher level PaaS services, you get a lot of the AI stuff, and then you can also convert this to run on-prem. But then on the other hand, I think another important part I see is a lot like when it comes to security, right? The cloud these days especially is like providing a lot of the security capabilities. In the Microsoft case, think about Defender, Sentinel, and many other things. Like if you just think about like also policy, right? If you just want to audit your environments and have control over your environments, all these things are coming and are like super efficient and practical in the cloud, which is almost impossible to do on-prem standalone, right? So you get all these benefits, especially in these hybrid environments, from the cloud. But now with all these technology we're having with Azure Local and Azure Arc, we also can bring these things to the on-prem environment as well. And again, like making it not a barrier between public and on-prem, but actually combining it into one thing. So I think like also with the way we look at it, and we're going to look at especially at the private cloud side, and we're going to dive into Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Local in just a bit. But like this is basically how we at Microsoft see the Microsoft Sovereign Cloud, right? And I think I just want to clarify here a little bit, because a lot of people think that this is something separate or something different from what you have in Azure, but that is not the case, right? So what we see as Sovereign Public Cloud, for example, is really the Microsoft public cloud, but then we add some specific features and controls and so on to it, which allow you to do really your sovereign workloads also in the public cloud. There is, for example, like the EU data boundary and things like that in place. So there's a lot of things which you get for free, I would call it, like the EU data boundary, the data guardian service, which is basically like EU personal controlling access and doing all that stuff. And we could spend an hour on just like talking about these things. So you get all these like things already. And then in addition, you get all these like services like confidential compute to encrypt all your data also in use, for example, with confidential compute, and then bring your own HSM, bring your own key, and so on. So that all these together, you can basically implement that. And we also have, for example, the sovereign landing zones, so that you can implement this in a very sovereign way in the public cloud. But again, we also understand that there's other reasons, and then that's where, for example, the sovereign private cloud comes in, where we really see, hey, there is a need to run on in a specific location or with specific control, right? And that is where, for example, Azure Local can come in, and that is what I want to talk a little bit more about right now with you, is about the Azure Local part. So, Dino, for the people who are not necessarily familiar with Azure Local that much, and we already mentioned it a few times, can you quickly give like a very short overview of what Azure Local is, and like explain a little bit for someone who doesn't really know what it actually offers?
Azure Local basically is the cloud operating system for the sovereign private cloud. So basically, it's these days the customers normally have a Windows Server. So at some point it was Windows Server in the past before, but this is Azure Local now, which means that it has the Arc agent, which I just called a long cable to Microsoft. This means it's a certified hardware platform from a couple of OEMs. There's a catalog for Azure Local. One of them is HP, there's Dell, there's Lenovo, there's Data it's a catalog. It has different levels of certification, like the integrated systems or the premier systems. So this is a SLA staff who gets updates first and whatever. But the whole main point behind this is like a controlled deployment. So this is nothing you insert an ISO image and click setup, next, whatever. This really is like you bring the machine online, it gets hooked up to the cloud in your Azure tenant online, and we deploy the hardware out of Microsoft Azure, but with a package which is called the SBE, the System Builder Extension. This means we have a package where you have drivers, you have policies, you have firmware packages, and best practice settings for Microsoft Hypervisor, because we run Microsoft Hyper-V as well as storage spaces direct behind this. So this means it's a hyper-converged cluster starting with one very small node. Then there's a version which has 3 very small, from a hardware perspective size systems with like 2 disks only. And then we have the regular nodes, which normally go out like in a 2-node cluster or up to 16 nodes. This is something we can then talk to customer. This is why people like me with Binbox are there as in my role as Chief Cloud Architect to make sure we have the right sizing. I mean, you know, the market these days, we don't have only Intel, there's also AMD. And if I take the latest generation AMD CPUs and memory capabilities in one box, you can bring so many VMs in. And the beauty around this is that everything is certified from Microsoft, signed, like you can't change many of the things because it's like from an approach, the software packages are signed with Microsoft certificates as well as the updates from the hardware vendors, whatever. And then when it's installed, it gets locked like with Windows Defender application control, so nobody can run source code which is not trusted or programs that the software doesn't know. So it's basically like from an idea that people understand it, it's like a look and feel of Windows Core Server, just the black DOS box or command prompt and a couple of basic settings for the network, and the rest is done in the Azure portal. And then you can create out of Microsoft Azure, and that's the beauty behind this. You basically get your private region, which is then in your basement, in the data center of Binbox in Romania, whatever. You can freely name it, and then you can control the systems out of the cloud, and you can deploy a VM. And then the system checks, is the space image for Windows Server 2025 there? If not, it takes care about the distribution of this image down to the hardware and spins it up. You can make changes for the networks. You can make the changes from CPU memory. You can make the monitoring. You can add a Sentinel. You can have your log analytics reporting in there. You have the patch and update management to keep these systems up to date. So there's so much control, but the control is done with the same users and credentials and identity and government rules that you had already for your online cloud, that you had in your Entra, like conditional access as well. You could say, if someone wants to patch and update our Azure Local hardware, then he needs to be logged in from one of our main offices, coming from IP address, whatever, a domain or Entra joint device with a user account with MFA, which is at least like with a YubiKey, for example, or some other device, FIDO device. So long story short, it's a very controlled way to bring these nodes we run in Azure with the same idea behind it of security, Defender, and all the stuff we have, like the best and secure operating system that we can provide in Azure, we bring to the customers, and to achieve this, We have hardware partners who work with us to make sure that all this functionality which is needed in Azure is also existing on the customer side. And you just mentioned it's TPN 2.1 to have, for example, the trusted VM launch. You have said the bring your own key with the HSM appliances. There's so much stuff, and we don't let the customer alone. That's the best thing here, because we have the cloud adoption framework, we have the well-architectured framework, we have this awesome Azure local assessment now. So there's so much we can assist the customer and already bring him this new world. And the beauty is, the best case these days, I mean, everyone found out already, to jump away from the train of program and VMware is to go to Azure Local, because there's so many cool tools to jump over. So once Azure Local comes in, we can just transition your workloads from the VMware cluster, from whatever hypervisor you had before, put them on Azure Local, and then we can just leave them there and run them there. And you have all this playground with the new cool toys, and you can grow in your speed, the speed that you need beside your daily business. I mean, I've never heard someone who said, my IT admins, they have nothing to do. Now I get them Azure Local to learn something new. So basically, they are good to go. Like the VMware runs out in 3 months. We just migrate, lift and shift on the machine. No costs extra for this. We just take the license they have on the VMware side and bring the data center licenses to Azure Local with hopefully software assurance and a lot of cost benefits in that case for licensing. And then the customer can start with the transformation of the infrastructure, with the patch and update stuff, can run Server 2025. One thing here which comes up, I don't know if you've seen it, but Rob Hyman and his team did a great job. We have N-4. We can directly now, even when we convert these machines, bring them from Windows Server 2012 R2 to Windows Server 2025. So you can even bring a migration concept in while we move VMs in the time. So there's so many benefits, not only from the cost side, from efficiency, from migration speed, from licensing. It's just awesome. And then you grow in and you learn and adopt the private cloud server, the sovereign private cloud capabilities in the speed your team can handle it, or you manage to hire someone like the Binbox guys with me and the team behind it to help you with the migration project, and then help you run the hardware, take care about the hardware. And you just focus on AKS with the devs, for example, like we just said. And then the same script that runs it on Azure and updates it there does the same with Azure Local by just calling this private region that I just said that exists for Azure Local. So everything is automatable, no matter if you use Terraform, OpenTofu, you can use Ansible. There's so many ways to do automation then, and that's the real freedom. Especially it's the way to have consistent deployments. If there's no checklist by hand, no human in between, you already know if it worked one time here, it will work a second and a third and a fourth time, because the ARM deployment is either green or red. There's nothing in between. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, you mentioned it again, bring this infrastructure to the places you need it under your control, also together with service providers as well. So we talked about like that you obviously bring, you mentioned AKS and VMs and all these workloads as a base. Obviously there's a lot of more like the AI, IoT operations and so on. But one thing I want to talk about especially here is the virtual desktops.
Yes.
So we like, as you like, for those who don't know, Dino, what is Azure Virtual Desktop? Like, I know this is not just exists for Azure Local. This is like a full Azure service as well. But like, let's just focus right now on what is Azure Virtual Desktop.
Azure Virtual Desktop basically is a service that came from Microsoft's public cloud, which is basically, if you imagine in the past, you had Microsoft Terminal Services, is what it's called before, or Microsoft Windows Desktop Services, which it was called by then. And you had the session broker, you had a remote gateway that you had to dial in, you had to create policies. And long story short, you had to provide many things before your server to dial in from the outside to make home remote workplaces able to log in. But then there was not the one solution for everything, because it was not that fast, the compression was not that efficient, whatever. So Microsoft developed this service from the ground up new and brought this service, which was called Azure Virtual Desktop. And at some point, Microsoft also integrated FS Logics for the profile management, which is awesome, which is used also when you use Citrix or VMware Horizon or Omnisa Horizon, how it's called these days. So Microsoft evolved the service, and then there came something unpredictable, which was called COVID. And in COVID, we had so many companies who from one day to another could not go into office anymore. And I remember days where I talked to Microsoft people and they were like, per day in one location of Microsoft Germany, 20, 30,000 workplaces brought online just because of the automation possibilities. You just said, I now want to have a Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. The customer already had Office 365. Basically, we had the user, we had the MFA authentication, we have passwords set, they had clients already. So Microsoft added the part of the connection brokering and the remote access. And then they brought the Windows 10 and now in these days, Windows 11 Enterprise Desktop operating system. And they made it as a terminal server. It's called Windows 11 Enterprise multi-session hosts. This means that you can have, depending on the size of your hardware setting underneath the VM series, like if you have a VM with 4 cores or 12, you can run 10 or like 40 users on it. But at the end of the day, it's a real Windows 11 controllable by Intune. It's completely a client, not complaining about terminal services. There's a special way they use Teams on there with hardware and media acceleration. You can run 3D software in it. So it's a very, very optimized Azure version of the old terminal services brought to you with the power of just a couple of clicks in Azure. And this one is super easy also with auto scaling to say, if we have 10 people logged in, then bring a third node up. And if then we are under 10, then delete it again to save money. There's a lot of automation behind it to have like a dynamic scale. When you need when you have a peak of many users, you just spin up the machines. And when the users go home, you just go back to a minimum state so that a couple of people that write emails overnight can log in. But at the same time, it's always patched and updated. So if we have this, we have the automation, like I said again. So Microsoft updates the Windows 11 image. We compile the new image. Many users know this process as a golden master. We script it. It's not a golden master because we modify, but it's super easy, automatable, and it's super, super, super efficient to learn and super fast compared to making remote desktop services with a Windows server, like Server 2025, as we have this media acceleration and all that stuff in it. And this same AVD service extends the Azure local deployment so that you can have, for example, like I said, this couple of terminal servers for the engineers running on the hardware in the factory. So if they work with 3D drawings and simulation and stuff, this data never leaves the company. And at the same time, these guys have their home workplace, which is running in Azure. So that was the point with COVID as well. We don't need to buy and invest in hardware, especially these days where we see memory prices exploding in the last 3 months. We had CPU price exploding, hardware drives, NVMEs crazy expensive. So it's unpredictable where IT goes with all these possibilities. So AVD basically is the service which is super easy to use in the cloud and also on Azure local. And for proof of concepts, it's super easy to run the POC in Azure. And if we don't need it, we don't pay. If we need it, we pay. It's super, super easy. And most of the time, the user license for this terminal service host is included in our Microsoft 365 license as well. So there's also no extra cost from the customer. So basically a replacement for Citrix and VMware and other terminal solutions, hardware and media accelerated with a lot of cost savings. So end the marketing slot.
Fantastic. So yeah, so we have the Azure Virtual Desktop offering, as you mentioned, in Azure, where you host your session hosts also in Azure. And then now, as you mentioned, with Azure Virtual Desktop for Azure Local, we can actually have these session hosts running on premises at edge locations or in a data center of your choice, basically running on Azure Local. Now, you mentioned some of this, like what could be reasons for why do customers want to actually do this, to actually run this instead? I mean, with Azure, we have all this dynamic scaling, right? You can shut down these session nodes when you don't need it, you don't pay them. But there are obviously reasons why you want to also run these session hosts on-prem. And I think also what you just mentioned, I think one of the great benefits with this is actually that we allow to run these multi-session hosts for Windows 11 and Windows 10, so that you don't that you actually get these full operating systems, which you only usually otherwise get in Azure. So again, again, you mentioned a few of the reasons, but what would be reasons why customers want to run this on Azure Local?
First of all, the cost savings that I said from the VMware side, as well as the Citrix side, VMware Horizon side, and all this. Then the latency is a big issue. So if you see, for example, that you have a machine, you just said it also, the AI stuff. Imagine if you have a production like for bottles, for cans, whatever. It's so fast. There's no time to bring this data to the cloud and back and do the interferencing in there. So we have the need to process something locally because the latency is too much, or we process data which is not intended to go out. And last but not least, you have so many systems in your factory, like card management for third-party machines, the management of the user access, time management. Imagine, I mean, you can ask Facebook, they have a lot of experience in this, locking themselves out from a data center. So I don't think every system should go in the cloud, even if it could, but most of the time it shouldn't, for example, for access control stuff. So imagine you go to the card reader, you bump the card in and nothing happens just because the software runs in the cloud and you have an internet outage. So there are many reasons for this, and this is why I said we need to know the requirements and use cases to understand what it's for. So long story short, there's not the one answer for everything, but you have the choice. So if you say we need something on-prem, it's not much more work. It's just the same work in the cloud, just on another region, but with the same process. And that's the beauty of it, that you run the cloud on different locations with different use cases, but the management, the process over it, like for privilege identity management, for just-in-time administration, just enough administration, your whole controls for security and operating from the user side and security side and all that is exactly the same in the public cloud, in the hybrid cloud, as well in the edge cloud, where there's no connectivity, like we said, energy providers and whatever for critical infrastructure. So I think that there's not the answer. Azure local is for you if you do ABC. The thing is, we need to know, and then you have a lot of benefits for free, like the patch and update management. We have the stuff with the AVD host that I just mentioned. The license are included. You don't need to buy VDA licenses from Microsoft's other license programs. There are so many benefits using our first-party service where you get free stuff back until the extended security updates, which we provide also for Azure Local for free, which costs easily tens of thousands of euros if you run old servers and you can't upgrade because of legacy software applications. So I have not seen a pattern for this. Sometimes it's just the company owner who has a bad feeling giving the data out. It's also one of the common use cases as well. So the hardware shortage will get a big reason to renegotiate, because this is black box, which is available on a fixed queue, and it's the OEM's responsibility to make sure the hardware is in stock. But I don't know, what's your opinion? What's the main reason to, beside the license cost? I mean, the last 2 years were driven by the Broadcom stuff. And yes, we get it for free, basically, with the hybrid benefits if you have a software assurance and current Windows Server licenses, which is a big benefit because even the AKS came in for free. So you have a big playground. You can use custom service, a complete stock full of candy, and you decide which one you take.
Yeah, no, I agree. There are many good reasons for running this, especially again focusing on the Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Local, while focusing on like data sovereignty or latency requirements and so on. Still getting like all these benefits you would run in the cloud, but basically you have them running on-prem. So we're at the end of this webinar. Can you basically tell us, if now people want to learn more, where should they go?
They should just open a web browser and type in binbox.com, and they end up on the website of Binbox in Romania. And then they can just contact us, call us, write us an email, find us on social media where you found this videos. I hope you enjoyed the concept. We are always happy to do a live demo or even evaluation, proof of concepts, as well as just assessments, and to give you a feeling about what you need and what the cost side beside this is. If you have existing hardware and don't know where your road is going to, we even come there and then provide you a migration idea and plan behind this. So we are the full service provider from the planning side until hosting it in our data centers and operating it. So you use the cloud. We bring you and help you. We're hand holding you all the time. And then the binbox.com website gives you the contact data. I'm the chief cloud architect there with a couple of awesome colleagues. So if you call us, we're there, and then we can help you. And can you make customized demos based on your requirements and your ideas? And the beauty of this, and we just talked about this, Thomas, really is that we have so many blueprints for so many people, which already really saves so much time, because it's the best as of today, security architecture that we have, which we run in the public cloud, we transport it to the customer. And in my opinion, running Azure Local is the securest way of executing on-prem clouds, because you need them. If you don't need it, I mean, if you can use just cloud services, I think cloud first is still there just for cost efficiency. But there's no door closed. If it runs on Azure Local and the day comes and we want to have it in the cloud, we just move it over. And that's the beauty of it, that you don't close doors by deciding A or B. It's always A with B, and then we handle the data left and right and see if there are adjustments over time that we need to do.
Awesome. Fantastic. Dino, thank you so much for talking today. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and see you another time.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.